Hi, I'm Emily Lawler with MLive. I'm here with Chris Thomas, who is the former director of elections in Michigan. He was also a senior advisor to city clerk in Detroit and was at the TCF Center during the counting this election cycle. And we're here to talk about the hearing in the House Oversight Committee in Michigan's legislature here in Lansing. With Rudy Giuliani yesterday. So Rudy Giuliani is, of course, the personal attorney to President Donald Trump. And he came to Lansing, testified in this committee in a really unusual format. So if you're used to watching legislative committees, typically what happens is that the chair brings up people, they testify, and then the members of the committee sort of go back and forth with them. They have some questions. And what happened this time was essentially that Giuliani, they brought him up along with Jenna Ellis, another attorney with the Trump campaign, and they brought up their own witnesses sort of within the committee. So it was a really unusual format. And there was just, frankly, a lot of things said, a lot of information. And I wanted to bring Chris to all of you to fact check some of that information. There have been many, many rooms that I have been in where attorneys, reporters, canvassers are looking to Chris Thomas because he is the one who knows the answers. He had a decades-long career in Michigan elections, and I'm really excited to tap into some of his expertise. So we are going to play some clips from the hearing that happened last night. It went from roughly 6 p.m. until roughly 10:30 or 40 p.m. It was quite a long hearing. We are not going to make you listen to the whole thing, but we have some excerpts. And I'll be asking Chris about some of these to react to and fact check some of the things that we heard last night. So the first clip is from Rudy Giuliani himself.
The voting machine that you used in much of the state, I believe much of the state, not all, Dominion, which broke down in Antrim County, that alerted people to take a look at it. And lo and behold, it became a tremendous surprise to the people of America. It was a very big surprise to me that our votes are sent out of the United States. It's also a big surprise to me that our votes are counted by a foreign company. And it's even a bigger surprise to me that if you do the slightest bit of due diligence, you will find out that this company has been in trouble many, many times, was just disqualified in the state of Texas, under another name was thrown out of Chicago. In its infancy, had ties with Hugo Chavez, Venezuela, conducted fraudulent elections in 2 South American countries, and have been disqualified in several other countries and states.
So, Chris, one striking thing out of that is just right off the bat, who counts our votes in Michigan and where are they counted?
Well, the ballots are counted. Actually, they're tabulated as soon as you put it into the tabulator. And it is not tabulated off of images that are created. It's tabulated off that ballot that the voter filled out, him or herself, and that's how it's tabulated. Absentee ballots, mail ballots, they go to counting boards and they're tabulated in similar equipment. Again, the ballot itself is what is tabulated, not any images.
So where does this claim come from that our ballots are being tabulated by a private company overseas?
It comes from the imagination of those who are intent on trying to overturn the election and basically disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of Michigan voters. There was a big brouhaha at the beginning of the hearing of whether Mr. Giuliani and his witnesses should be sworn in. And I think had they been sworn in, it might have been a shorter hearing, because there is no truth to the claim that our ballots are counted by in a foreign country, or that the voting system is owned by a company in a foreign country, or that Caesar or Hugo Chavez had anything to do with the current Dominion voting systems. These are conspiracies that QAnon propagates. And I find it incredible that here we are sitting in front of the Michigan legislature, hearing from a renowned person, Mr. Giuliani, about QAnon type conspiracies. Quite incredible.
And I don't know much about Dominion as a company, as a contractor, as a system that we use. Is there a history of problems with those machines at all in Michigan?
No, we went through a qualification period back 2015, 2016. 3 companies were qualified, ES&S, Hart, and Dominion. And then each county selected from one of those system from the 3. Dominion has a good portion of the state, a lot of the smaller jurisdictions, plus Wayne County and Kent County. So 2 very big counties. It's like any system. There can be issues, but nothing in terms of the ability to count. Now, these systems are all certified by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. It goes through rigorous voting system testing. It has to meet voluntary voting system guidelines that are promulgated by NIST and the Election Assistance Commission in Washington. So it's not like these are just off the shelf and nobody's bothered to look at the software. This software has been inspected, and it in fact is been proven to work just fine.
Well, our next clip actually touches on these machines as well. So we're going to play one part of the testimony from Colonel Phil Waldron.
One of the myths that has been propagated even by the director of CISA at Homeland Security, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is that, well, these machines are not connected to the internet. In the operator's manual, there's a whole page of references that show you how and when to connect and what selectors to connect to servers and to routers, so it is connected to the internet. That's how you get election night reporting. That's through another company called Clarity Elections. They provide early reporting to the news media.
So there's been a lot of talk about the machines, specifically at the TCF Center, where you were based on election night, being connected to the internet, people saying that they've seen cords that would indicate they were. Explain that for us.
Sure. I mean, here's the problem that these folks have is that, they may be very competent computer scientists, but they are not competent election experts. And when they come into the field, it takes a long time to ramp up to have that ability. So yes, he's right. The manual talks about how you could connect the system to the internet to upload results. But that doesn't mandate anybody to be connected to the internet. The fact is, at the TCF Center, Detroit was not connected to the internet. It is a local area network, a LAN, that connected a server to the tabulators, to the adjudication stations. We made a couple partial returns to have those uploaded to the county clerk and to the city's website. Before we did that, we had to download it from the server onto a stick. It was then driven up to West Grand Boulevard, where the Department of Elections is located, and uploaded there at their computer. They can say, as long as they like, that it's all connected and there was internet capability in the room. Fine, but the reality is it was not connected to the internet.
Mm-hmm. So our next clip is from one of the more colorful witnesses, I guess, Melissa Caroni. And The concern she raised is, on its face, one of the most concerning, I think, although there's been some debunking that's gone already about ballots being counted more than once. So we'll cue up that clip now.
I observed numerous employees, city workers, running batches of ballots through the tabulators countless times without discarding them first. The computer would throw an error. It would say ballot number 25. There's an error. I would say pull out ballot number 25, slowly pull it out, put it on top, take the ballots that had already been tabulated, which are on top of the tabulating machine now, put them all back in a stack, discard the entire batch, and rescan it. Instead of discarding, they were just rescanning, counting ballots 9 to 10 times, counting votes 9 to 10 times.
So that woman who testified described herself as a subcontractor with Dominion. She was there for the technical sort of support of the machines, I guess, but not a trained election worker by any means. When you listen to that clip, does what she's describing sound familiar, and what do you think she was seeing?
Well, it's not familiar because it didn't happen. It's again, people that may have limited technical expertise stepping into the world of elections and making a lot of assumptions without the knowledge to do so, at least to make accurate assumptions. So in one of her affidavits, she said that she saw a batch of 50 ballots run 8 times. So that'd be 400 ballots. Now the first 50 would be accurate, right? They would be for the 50 people whose names are in the poll book attached to those ballots. But the next 7 batches of 3, which would be 350 ballots, would have no corresponding names in the poll book. And so at the end of the night, that precinct would be 350 ballots out of balance. There are no precincts in Detroit, and specifically the absent voter counting board, that are out of balance by 350 votes. Anything close to that. So there are checks and balances to show that that kind of mistake happened, that it could be caught and remedied. Now, her claim gets bigger each time she talks. It gets up to 10 times now. And then, all these other people claiming to see the same thing, 2 other people. But I think what they're looking at is not what they are seeing is not what's really happening. And there might be a counter that's running that doesn't mean that it's going to keep counting those same ballots each time. So the checks and balance would have clearly shown that.
I think that's what Representative Stephen Johnson was trying to get at with his line of questioning for that witness. Was that what you saw there?
Yes, Representative Johnson was right on point. I thought he zeroed right in on a good point. Is that how, with 30,000 more ballots, being run through, how that would line up with the number of names in the poll book.
Yeah. Well, the next clip that we're going to pull up is about another thing we've heard a lot about, which is the backdating of ballots. I know that there's been some explanations floating out there on this, but let's hear what this witness had to say.
You put a sticky on the ballot saying that it was an invalid ballot.
Yes.
Because it was issued after the deadline.
Yes.
And she wanted you to backdate it, correct?
Yeah, let me explain. What happened was when I was told to enter November 2nd as the receive date, I noticed one of the ballot the date was November 3rd, absentee ballot. The deadline for absentee ballot issuance is November 2nd, 4 p.m. So it was issued on November 3rd, election day. It was received, received everything on November 3rd. Then I checked whether that voter is a new registered, newly registered. No, he was not registered on November 3rd. He was registered in sometime in 2010, 10 years ago. So you are not supposed to issue absentee ballot on election day to already registered voters. After Mr. Thomas read that note, he said, yeah, she's right. But why should we punish voters for processors' mistake?
So can you just explain generally how ballots are dated, or how absentee ballots are dated when they come in?
Sure. So there are a number of dates that are involved in this, and the dates are spelled out. One, there's a date when the application is received. Then there's a date when the ballot is issued, and then there's a date when the ballot comes back. So these people, we found ballot envelopes that were time date stamped on either election day, but most of them were time date stamped on the 2nd, which was Monday. And people can vote whether they don't have to be a newly registered voter to vote on election day. A lot of people put their ballots in the drop box on election day. What had not happened was the last step did not get taken care of. They did not get entered, the receipt. So we knew that these people had applied. We knew that they had been issued. And it looked very much like they were on the same day. In other words, people had gone into a satellite site, received the ballot, voted it, and gave it back. And the person there did not get that into the computer. So this was an error correction process, so we did not disenfranchise people. Ms. Jacobs had a view that was like, we had a hard time understanding what she was trying to say. And at some point, I know the supervisors, we need to move on. We were not going to go back and recheck signatures and everything. The envelopes made it clear these signatures had already been checked by her colleagues because she worked in a satellite. So this was really, we had the envelopes. They had a time date stamp as being received before the election. And we're doing no more than what we've done under all 4 secretaries of state that I've worked for, which is you give the voter the benefit of the doubt. And when there's a clerical error, you don't disenfranchise that voter.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got one more clip, and this is from Rudy Giuliani's sort of closing statement. So let's take a listen next to what he had to say.
That certification that was done by your state is a complete phony. It's a false statement made to the United States government. Those are prosecutable, by the way. That's not the vote by any means in Michigan. That's not the vote in Michigan. I don't know what the vote in Michigan is, but it's at least 300,000 or 400,000 votes off from what the real vote in Michigan is.
So I wanted to start first with that 300 or 4,000 or 400,000 off number. Where is that coming from?
Who knows? I mean, he just makes stuff up. He doesn't even know what state he's in half the time, whether it's Pennsylvania or Michigan or Arizona or Nevada. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, he's a great performer. I guess some people really get enjoyment out of watching him. He's not fact-based. He had the audacity to say that, well, Mr. Trump at midnight was way ahead. He knew, as did every other person who watches this election, that mail ballots were going to come in much later than the precinct ballots. And you don't get to pick your time where you say, oh, I'm ahead, so let's freeze the frame right here, and that's the end of the election. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to say that all of these others that came in later that put Mr. Biden over the top shall be voided, and that those voters' votes won't count. And he's throwing a lot of dust up in the air in an attempt to make that argument. And clearly you could tell from last night, it's falling on deaf ears. There were representatives there who are concerned about the things that they heard and would like to have more information about it, which is totally legitimate. But I didn't see any representative saying that, yes, the legislature should run a investigation and then reallocate and select electors that are committed to Mr. Trump. Our legislature has more integrity than to do something like that.
And when Mr. Giuliani describes our certified vote as phony, can you just explain a little bit about the Board of State Canvassers process, the role they play, and what it means for a vote to be certified in Michigan?
Sure. So there's 3 levels. You start with the precinct boards on election night, and they close everything out. Yes, they should balance. And then it goes to the county boards of canvassers. They have 14 days. And they go back and they check every tabulator tape that comes out of the tabulator you saw on election day. And they compare that to the accumulation report that's been created to make sure that the votes are properly recorded. And if there are out of balance precincts, they attempt to balance them, go into them, find out why, and see if they can rectify that. In large counties, 14 days is not an adequate amount of time to do that for every precinct out of balance. There are precincts across the state out of balance. There's nothing necessarily untoward about that. And it doesn't even mean that they won't be recounted. And after the county certifies, it then goes to the Board of State Canvassers. And their role really is to collect the 83 certified sets of returns, accumulate those to get the final official returns statewide for president and other statewide offices, in addition to judicial offices, proposals, and legislative offices across county lines. So wherever there's more than one vote, they pull them together to make sure that you get the official total. And then they certify. And then the post-election remedy stage starts, which is a recount. And for all these votes, nobody asked for a recount, which is quite surprising. I mean, Mr. Trump won this state 4 years ago by 10,700 votes. There was a recount. That recount would not have changed the results. We got through 40% of it before it was called off by the courts. Mrs. Clinton received 102 more votes than she had election night. And had we continued on with the recount and gone north, I'm sure Mr. Trump would have gotten those back. But in any event, even if he didn't, it was nowhere near the votes necessary to even change that 0.2% victory that he had. And he knows, and Rudy knows, and everybody else knows that 154,000 votes are not going to be turned over in a recount, in an audit. It just isn't going to happen. And they should just let it go. They're certainly entitled to run it through the court system if that's what they want to do. They shouldn't burn the building down on the way. And that's the most concerning part of this, is that, you know, by the time they get done, the system's going to be standing in ashes if they have their way. I mean, just really destroying confidence in the system, creating conspiracies that have no basis in fact, and it's quite unfortunate.
So, of everything that was presented in this hearing, and I should say that Rudy Giuliani made a point that it was a small portion. He held up a binder, I think, of the rest of the information he had. Obviously, it was a 4-hour hearing. It was not a 3-day hearing by any means, but taking into account everything that was presented by the president's personal attorney, where does that information fall on a scale, sort of from a very typical election compared to the dozens of other elections you've been involved with, to some sort of indication of widespread fraud?
I think it tips on the positive side of the scale. Consider what these clerks went through. Running an election in a pandemic. Nobody's run an election in a pandemic since, I guess, 1918. And we are in a new era in Michigan where the people decided that we will have vote by mail in the 2018 constitutional amendment, which was a godsend to have it available now so that everybody could vote by mail rather than taking the risk of standing in line at a polling place. But so these clerks ran 3 elections this year. The first one was relatively normal. It was before the COVID conditions were known and any kind of restrictions were in place. And then August and again in November, we were right in the height of it. And by the time the November election came, it was increasing quite dramatically. So this was a tough election. And then people were voting by mail who, one, had never done that before. So they were struggling. And the volume is something clerks have never seen. Detroit, 174,000 mail ballots. Their high was 81,000, and that was in August. And before that, they'd never gotten out of the 70,000 range. And done under very tight timetables. So when you see that, and you see how well this was run, I think people should take their hats off to the state's election officials. So everyone wants to say, oh, there are all these out of balances. Yes, there are. But you know what? It's dealing with maybe 200, 300 votes up or down. And when you net out the up or down, you're dealing with about 110 votes. Should that be looked at in an audit after the election? Sure. And they should find out why that is and how to correct that in the future. But to suggest that it somehow or another taints the election is a far, far reach. There is no precedent in this state, or probably any other state, that says because challengers had a hard time seeing things, or that people weren't nice to the challengers, that means you can throw out hundreds of thousands of votes. That's not there. Those are things that need to be corrected, and where they occurred, they should not occur. But what's not been heard yet, because all the hearings so far have been relatively one-sided in terms of the challenger side. And a lot of these challengers that showed up on Wednesday, after they got social media messages to go to TCF, stop the vote, Trump's going to court to stop the vote, those people that came in with a view that something wrong was going on and that they were going to stop it. They had no idea what they were looking at. They were rude, they were aggressive, and yeah, they probably made a bunch of the workers quite angry. They were talked to rudely. They were told they didn't know what they were doing. They were breaking rules in terms of trying to challenge every single ballot in a precinct, which is not allowed. So like everything, there's two sides to it. Neither side should be talking foully or rudely to one another. But the fact is, both sides carry a responsibility.
And you spoke earlier about not wanting to leave sort of our election system in shambles after all of this. There's been almost 12 hours of hearings over the past 2 days, largely questioning our election system and some of the procedures and what happened at TCF specifically, a lot of it. If the legislature wanted to rebuild trust in our election system, what could they do at this point?
Well, they could do a few things. One, they need to get off the dime on this issue about non-recountability because of precincts out of balance. There's no good reason for that. There's some historical reasons that I won't go into here back in the 50s, but those conditions don't exist anymore. And everyone goes, oh, there's something wrong with this precinct, so let's not look at it. And everyone shakes their head and they go, well, that seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't we do that? And that's the valid question. So they need to get rid of that. And once they get rid of that, then the balancings, which still must be done, does not have this draconian result of there not being a recount. And then second, they need to give these clerks more time to process mail ballots. Pre-processing is done in states all over the country, and it's done from 15 to 20 days before ballots are being opened, put into a tabulator, sealed. There's stiff criminal penalties for disclosing anything. It's not done. Nobody's disclosing these results. It's done in Ohio. It's done in Florida. It's done in Illinois. It's done in Minnesota. It's time that Michigan get with a modern election system. And then you're not dealing with 174,000 ballots in a one-day period. So that's what's needed. There are resources, of course, that are needed. It was brought out last night that part of the adjudication process is a bottleneck, and more technology there costs money, and that could be helpful to freeing that up. So I'm sure election officials across the state have any number of recommendations based on their experience, but I think that they did a marvelous job.
Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your encyclopedic knowledge of the election system with us and our readers and viewers. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.